In this lecture, you're going to learn how to work with Excel spreadsheets in Python. Out of all the lectures in this course, this is one of my absolute favorites because it has a lot of applications in the real world. So here I have a brand new project called PyExcel. In this project, I have a spreadsheet called transactions. You can download this as a zip file attached to this lecture. When you open this, you're going to see something like this. So we have 3 columns: transaction ID, product ID, and price, as well as 3 rows of data. Pretty straightforward. So back to VS Code. The package we're going to install is OpenPyExcel. So let's run pipenv install OpenPyExcel. All right, beautiful. Now let's select our virtual environment from the status bar and set it to PyExcel. Next, we're going to install Pylint just like before. All right, now on the top, we start by importing OpenPyExcel. Now, when working with spreadsheets, we need to start with a workbook object. We can either create an empty workbook in memory or load an existing workbook on disk. So this module, OpenPyExcel, has this workbook class. We can create a new workbook object like this. Now we have an empty workbook with 1 sheet. Later, I will show you how to save this to disk. We also have this function, OpenPyExcel.loadWorkbook, for loading an existing workbook. So in this demo, I'm going to load transactions.xlsx. And this gives us a workbook object. So I'm going to comment out this line because we're not going to use it. So we have a workbook. Now this workbook has an attribute called sheet names. This is actually an attribute, even though VS Code is showing it as a function. Let's print this on the terminal. So in this workbook, we have only a single sheet, that is sheet 1. Let's go ahead and access that. That is pretty easy. We use square brackets, just like how we work with dictionaries. So sheet 1. And by the way, this is case sensitive. So if you use a lowercase s, you're going to get an exception telling you that this sheet doesn't exist. So make sure to spell it properly. Now we have a sheet object. We can also create a new sheet or remove an existing one. So our workbook object has a couple of methods you should be aware of. One is create sheet. Here we pass the name of the new sheet, like sheet 2. And optionally, we can pass an index. For example, we can pass 0 to put this before sheet 1. We also have remove underline sheet. That takes a sheet object like this, and it will remove it. Now, I'm not going to use these methods in this demo. Just be aware of them in case you need them in the future. So we have a sheet. Next, we need to access an individual cell or a range of cells. That is pretty easy. So using square brackets, we can pass the coordinate of a cell. So we can pass A1, and that refers to the cell here, A1. So first row, first column. So here we get a cell object. Now this cell object has a few attributes you should know about. One is value. We can print this on the terminal. So the value of this cell is transaction ID. You have seen that before. We can also change the value here. Pretty straightforward, right? We also have row. Let's print that on the terminal. We have column and coordinate. Let's have a look. So the row of this cell is 1, the column is A, and the coordinate is A1. Now we also have another approach to access an individual cell, and that is using the cell method of the sheet object. Let me show you. So instead of using square brackets and passing the coordinate, we can call sheet.cell and pass a row and a column. So 1 and 1. Now we can make this code more readable by using keyword arguments because it's not quite clear what row or what column we're working with here. So we set row to 1 and column to 1. And this gives us the exact same cell. Now obviously this code is shorter and easier to use, but the second approach is useful when we're iterating over all the rows and all the columns and we want to dynamically access various cells. Let me show you. So this sheet has a couple of attributes. One is max row. Let's print that on a terminal. We also have max column. Let's run the program. So in this sheet, we have 4 rows and 3 columns. Now we can easily iterate over all these rows and columns. So we can write a for loop like this. For row in sheet.max underline row. Now this returns a number. So we need to pass that to the range function. Now, as you know, this function generates numbers starting from 0. So we need to set the start index to 1 because we don't have row 0 in a spreadsheet. The first row is 1. Also, for this reason, we need to increment this by 1 so we can access the last row. Now, using the same technique, we can iterate over all the columns. So for column in range of 1 and sheet.max underline column plus 1. Now we can call sheet.cell and pass the row and column here. And with this, we can print the value of each cell. Save the changes and run the program. So these are all the values we have in this spreadsheet. Now, using square brackets, we can also access a range of cells. So let me delete this for loop. Here are a few examples. We can access sheet of A, and this will return all the cells in the A column. So here's the A column. It will return all these cells. We can store the result in column. Let's print that and see what we get. So we get a tuple because here we have parentheses. In this tuple, we have 4 cell objects, cell A1, A2, A3, and A4. Pretty self-explanatory. We can also work with a range of columns. So sheet of A to C. This will return all the cells in columns A to C. Now let's store that here. So cells, and then print it on the terminal. Let's see what we get. Note that we get a tuple of tuples. So each tuple in this tuple will represent 1 column. Let me show you. So here's one of our inner tuples. In this tuple, we have cells A1, A2, A3, and A4. So this inner tuple represents the A column. That is this column here. So A1 all the way to A4. This is one of the inner tuples. Next to that, we have another tuple and then another tuple. And these 3 tuples are packed inside of another tuple. Okay? Now we can also use coordinates here. So sheet of, let's say, A1 to C3. And this will return all the cells in this area. So A1 to C3. Okay? Now using the same technique, we can also access the cells in a given row or a range of rows. So sheet of 1 returns all the cells in the first row. Or if we use 1 to 3, this will return all the cells in row 1 all the way to row 3. So this is how we can access a range of cells. Now this sheet object has a few methods you should be aware of. One of them is append, and we use that to add a row at the end of this sheet. So here we pass a list or a tuple of values. Let's say 1, 2, 3. We also have insert rows, and we use this to insert a row at a given index. We also have insert columns, as well as delete rows and delete columns. So you can perform various kinds of operations in a spreadsheet. You can also add charts, sort, and filter data, and so on. I leave it up to you to look at the documentation of OpenPyXL and learn about the features that you need in your applications. Now to finish this lecture, let's save this workbook. So workbook.save, we're going to save it as a new file. So transactions2.xlsx. Save the changes, run the program. Now we have a new spreadsheet here. And in this spreadsheet, we should have an extra row of data. And here's our updated spreadsheet. You can see the row that we added using Python.